Hey, everybody. So we're going to talk today about passwordless and two-factor authentication workflows with Node.js. So we are going to basically be using the Vonage Verify API throughout this workshop. Hopefully everybody has Node, NPM, but Node, NPM, and a Vonage account all ready to go. But we'll walk through all that at the beginning. First, we're just going to talk a little bit about why this stuff is important. And I'm going to turn my camera off because my fan is already going mental here. So we'll just look at the slides now. So the workflows that we're going to be covering in this workshop are passwordless access, 2FA for more secure logins, access codes for forgotten passwords, and an invitation to register. And we'll discuss all of those in detail as we get to them. But there's 4 just really basic workflows that we'll use to show how the flow of verifying a user via SMS is going to work. But first, we'll talk about how 2FA works. So you basically have accounts that are verified by some kind of unique data, and that's an email address, a phone number, or some kind of domain-specific information. And then there are logins or certain admin features that may require another piece of verification data. And you'll run into this in like a lot of things like GitHub, for instance, where you'll be going along and you've logged in, you're already logged in, and then you'll have to log in again maybe or revalidate yourself to do certain things that are more secure and require more security. And this is not something that came about in the last few years with the popularization of the term 2FA. It's not something that came along with the web. You've probably dealt with this before in any time that you've like opened a bank account or something in person, when we used to do that. You want to open an account, they want you to bring 2 forms of ID. They want not just the thing that they're going to tie your identity to, but something else to validate that identity when you're opening an account, for instance. So your primary data might be something like a session cookie, or it might be an alphanumeric password. But then your secondary data can be all kinds of things. It could be a code that you receive maybe via SMS or maybe via email. You can use something like Google Authenticator, which gives you a specific key that is time sensitive. And you can use a PGP key, which is not time sensitive and is a much more sort of robust type of way of authenticating yourself and creating a secure handshake between 2 parties. So the authentication process is basically that you have a user, they log in with their traditional credentials, or they reactivate a suspended session, whichever. And at that point, they're challenged for their secondary authentication, which is going to be, again, maybe an SMS, a code that you sent them via SMS or something like that. That secure code then matches the challenge with the passcode, and it sends a code if there's one that's going to be needed. And then the user supplies the code that they have received, and that's verified. And so that's the whole authentication process. It's actually like fairly simple once you get into the code, but it's a few different pieces, and it's a little bit of going back and forth. But once you get used to the rhythm of the going back and forth, then it's pretty straightforward and predictable, and you can apply it to a lot of different situations, which is really cool. And there are some pros and cons, of course, to being reliant on devices, particularly handheld devices. The pros are that this is better than one-factor authentication, so it's better than just having a login and a password. It's ubiquitous. Usually people have their phones on them if we're talking about phones, and usually we are. So you don't have to remember to carry around like a special fob or something like that with a password on it. You don't have to memorize something, and thus you don't have to do a lot of resets, because the code that you're using is unique every time. It's generated based on something, time or an external management tool like Bondage's. And then handheld operating systems are reasonably secure environments, which is cool. They're certainly a lot better than say, writing your password down on a Post-it note. So that's a bonus. On the other hand, you don't have the assurance of connectivity, which is fine for things like Google Authenticator that rely on their own mechanisms of generating those codes and don't care whether you're online or not. But it's not so good if you're trying to send an SMS. And if you switch the device or the SIM, then you can end up locking the user out of their account. Or if somebody else gets a hold of their device or even their number, you can end up giving malicious users access to their account. And devices are very vulnerable to physical security attacks. That's sort of the downside of them being on our person all the time, is that somebody can look over our shoulder, or somebody could even potentially like grab it while it's unlocked accidentally, and do all kinds of things to it. So there's some downsides as well. And there are also some concerns that we have to keep in mind when we're storing phone numbers. So even if an account is discovered by the phone number is a fragile primary ID, because of course phone numbers do change. They don't change as frequently as, say, usernames or something like that, but they do change. And this is highly dependent on sort of what your users are. So if your users are like very young people, their phone numbers are more likely to change. If they're older, they're not as likely to change, but they still do. So you want to also associate that phone number with a fixed user ID that's internal to your system, because you obviously are going to need to swap it out or have the option to swap it out. And you need to treat this as part of your authentication data. So it needs to be kept secure, needs to be kept private. You don't want to share it because it's effectively becoming the mechanism through which the user is going to get their password. Sessions and cookies. So the 2FA means that if you have a session, the session actually begins before it's authenticated, because your session begins with somebody indicating to you, this is who I am, this is my identity, please verify that identity. And so you have sort of this attenuated process of authentication where somebody has said, this is me, and probably here's a password. And then you're like, that's a good password, but I'm also going to need to check this other information. And so you may have the same process that extends a session. You may have the same thing that happens when you have to go in and do some kind of admin function. And those are all different sort of ways of looking at the idea of being logged in than what we traditionally think about, where we're just like, yes, username, password, submit, boom, done. I'm logged in until I log out. This is a lot more considered, which is good and secure. We also have to think about managing access to devices, because what we're essentially doing is we're creating sessions. We're not creating like a user who is either logged in or not logged in. We are creating multiple sessions. And so when somebody loses their phone, you have to have a way of getting them back in. And there are a lot of ways to do that. Email is obviously the kind of go-to secondary 2FA, I guess 3FA. And then if somebody gets a new phone, of course, they can do a phone-to-phone transfer and transfer their credentials across so that their information is backed up, and potentially even the active sessions if that's how your cookies are set up. You have things like Authenticator or backup codes that are popular. You could use messaging apps the same way that you use SMS, with some of the same ups and downs. And then, of course, we have passwords and security questions, which are kind of the least secure and maybe a step backward in terms of the amount of security we're able to offer our users. The project setup is going to be a little bit familiar, hopefully, to people who have been working in Node and Express, but we'll just go through all of it. So now we're going to go ahead and pop open a terminal and do a few things here. And this is the point where if you have questions, like let's ask the questions. We can stop. We don't need to rush through this. So please feel free to ask about anything that seems unclear. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to download a Svelte template app, because it'll be easier than creating all these files from scratch. So, and you can do that with npx and a tool called dgit, which is just going to copy this Svelte.js/template repo into a new directory that you can choose. Mine is called 2fa-workflows. And then we'll change into that directory once we've installed the Svelte template, and then run npm install to install everything that's in package.json. Can anybody give me a thumbs up to let me know that A, I'm still speaking, and B, that that part sounds good? Okay, thank you. Okay, so once you've got the Svelte template app installed, and then you've got the stuff from package.json within that app installed, then we're going to install a bunch of our own packages on top of it. So what we want to install for these four projects that we're going to be doing, which are all going to be within the same app, so they'll be kind of easy to reuse things. We're going to install concurrently, which is going to allow Express and Svelte to run simultaneously. Then we're going to install at Vonage/server/SDK, which is our Node SDK, and that's going to give you access to all of the Vonage API tools, including Verify, which is what we'll be using for these examples. Then we're also going to install Dot Env so that we can get access to an environment file or a Dot Env file to set environment variables, so that just for a little bit of security. I don't have these anywhere you can cut and paste them, unfortunately. This is one of the only places where you won't be able to cut and paste. I will try to get the code on GitHub so that you can cut and paste the actual project once it's set up. But this part's manual. Oh, thank you. Yeah, okay, I guess I could have done that. So and the next set of packages to install is going to be SQLite 3, which is going to be a data store for us, and then Connect SQLite 3, which is some middleware to allow Express to use it. Cookie Parser, which is also middleware for doing what you would think and parsing cookies, and then Express Session, which is middleware for allowing Express to manage sessions. Okay, while Amanda is doing that, thank you very much, Amanda. I'm gonna see about making this code available to everyone so that we can copy that. Okay. Okay, so if everyone has everything all set up now, we can continue on to the next step. I mean, we'll be able to get all this stuff from package.json too after the fact, so that's no big deal. Okay, so now we want to go into package.json though, and we're going to need to add one line, which is this final line here under scripts, which is a new command serve, and that's going to use concurrently to run simultaneously the commands node server.js and npm run dev. Npm run dev refers to the dev just 2 lines above that comes with the Svelte template, and that's basically just saying run rollup and serve Svelte. And so if we add this, then from the terminal at some point, we're going to need to be able to, oh, here, it's just the last piece that we need here. So just this final line here, and then the rest of it. The rest of it will already be there. So if you're not seeing this, well, if you're not seeing package.json, or you're not seeing these three other scripts, build, dev, and start, then please say something, so that we can make sure that everybody's on the same page. Sounds good. Sarah, this is a pretty hands-on workshop, so we're not going to talk a whole lot about like theory. We're mostly going to be like getting our hands dirty, just kind of building all this stuff out, trying it out, and seeing if it works for us. And the code is now public on GitHub, so you'll have access to just grab it and play around with it too. So. Okay, so I'm hearing from Teresa that install is just finished. So if everyone is, okay, great. So it seems like everybody is on the same page. So I'll give everybody a minute to go to package.json, make sure that's looking okay. And then we will continue on to greatness. Okay, so the next step is going to be setting up our server.js, and I will not ask anybody to type all this in unless you want to. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and share. I'm going to share the code, and you can copy and paste basically whichever parts you want. I would recommend taking, instead of just cloning this, I would recommend that you copy and paste from these files, just so that you can create your own version of it that isn't just all of these examples together. You can kind of pick and choose what you want. So this will have all this code, including server.js. Oh, sorry, server.js just goes in the root of the directory that you created. So 2FA workflows / server.js is where mine is. And for the most part, these things are all going to live in the root or with their friends. So you'll see that once we get into the Svelte components, those are all going to live in public. No, they're not. They're going to live in source, and public is going to be the CSS and the index that starts us off, stuff that we don't really need to touch for this. So for the most part, we're just going to be working in server.js in the root of the directory, and we'll be working in source / various Svelte components for the client side. And so what we're doing in this server.js is we're going to require .env, and that's going to grab a .env file and load everything in it into the process.env object within server.js, so that we can access things that we want kept secret. And then we're going to do the standard Express stuff. So we'll require Express, and then we're going to instantiate it, and we're going to get an app constant that we can reuse here. That's that instance. And then with that app constant, we're going to use Express URL encoded for parsing the information that we get, Express.json for parsing information we get, Express.static public to declare where we're going to be serving static pages from, which is the public directory under 2FA workflows. And then finally, we will create one endpoint, which is just the root of our site at slash, and we will send the public index.html file when somebody requests that, i.e. when they hit the localhost 5000, because you'll see down at the bottom that we're listening on port 5000 for this. Okay, so moving on from that, let's create a .env file. And to do this, we're going to need to work a little bit with the Vonage APIs. All you really need to do is you'll need to go into your Vonage API dashboard. So does everybody have a Vonage account already? Aaron, I did start with Vanilla.js, but it's I wanted to give you something that was a little bit more reusable. So these are all kind of set up as components so that we don't have to rewrite as much stuff, basically. But it's pretty easy to take out the Svelte stuff and move this. Like, the logic is all very simple. It's just a bunch of forms. So basically, Svelte is just saving us binding certain form attributes to the fetch operations that we're going to do. It is a personal preference kind of thing at the end of the day. So if you want to write a vanilla version of this as we're going along, it should be fairly straightforward. So do what you feel. Yeah, exactly like Clary says, you can get a Vonage account there, and so once you have that, you can add your credentials into .env. And your session secret, _secret, can be anything you want. Your API key will, of course, just be your API key, no brackets. Secret is your secret, no brackets. And you can find both of these on the main page of your Vonage dashboard. And this is kind of a straightforward piece of our APIs to be using, in that we won't need a lot of other authentication with Vonage in order to use these tools. We're basically going to be able to take the SDK that we installed already and our API key and secret, and with that, we're off to the races. We can start using the Verify API right away with those two pieces, which is super cool. If you're trying to do 2FA, if you've ever dealt with building a handshake from scratch in Node, this is a much less verbose way of doing it. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. And let's talk about now setting up Vonage sessions and data. So this is all going to be within our server. Again, in the GitHub project, you can go into server.js, and you will see all of these things within server.js already. But we'll just talk about what they mean in case any of them are unfamiliar or you don't understand why they're included. So the first thing we're going to do is set up Vonage, of course. So we'll require Vonage server SDK, and then we're going to create an instance of that. But our convention here is that we create uppercase Vonage to be the package, and then lowercase Vonage to be the instance of it. So this is going to be a new Vonage with our API key, API secret. And you'll see that we've used process.env. Like I mentioned before, we get the ability to do that with the Dot Env package that we are required at the very beginning. So then server.js has a bunch of stuff. So first we're going to require the file system, FS. we're going to create a database file, DB file, which is at data/SQLite.db. So if you want to create a data directory under your main directory, so 2FA workflows/data, that will give this database file a place to live. And then we want to check whether the database file already exists and create a Boolean for that. Then we're going to require SQLite with a verbose setting. We're going to create a database, which is going to be a new SQLite database using the DB file. So that's where that's where the database will live. And then we want to serialize these commands. So run them all. And if the database file does not exist, then we're going to run a command to, oh, there's an error in here, and I apologize for that. We're only going to run the first two commands. If you look at the code, you'll see that the third command has been removed. So we're just going to create one table for sessions, which is going to have a numeric phone number and a textual session ID. And then we're going to create another table for users, which is going to have a numeric phone number and a textual username. And then that's what we're going to do to set up our database. Next, we come to session management. We're going to require Express session, which is Express's middleware for managing sessions. And then we're going to have a SQLite store, which is going to be the SQLite store that's actually storing the sessions. So we're going to do our own stuff with SQLite. We're going to put information into it manually, but we're also going to have it storing our sessions, which we're not going to do anything with manually. Thank goodness. So then we're going to require cookie parser, and we're going to use session, which is going to take a whole bunch of settings here. So the store is going to be a new SQLite store. The secret is going to be the secret that we set in .env. Resave is going to be false. I don't actually know what that means. I'm not a SQLite expert by any stretch of the imagination. Save and initialize, I don't know what that means, but the cookie, I do know what that means. And so we're going to set a cookie for 1 week. So when somebody logs in, they have a cookie for 1 week, or until we restart Node, which is in my case, one of those always outweighs the other. But that's how we're going to set up the parameters of our session store. Okay, let's do let me do a temperature check right now. Is everybody caught up on all the install stuff and ready to proceed on to the client side? Maybe I'll give everybody a minute. Or is everybody just listening in, not following along, and would you prefer to just talk about these things in the abstract and then try it out later? Thank you, Teresa. Okay, great. Okay, well, I'll just continue then. So now we'll talk about our Svelte landing page, which is not the proper name for app.svelte, which you will see you've already got by default when you use the Svelte template. So we want to add some stuff to it. The first thing is we want to import all of our other components, which don't exist yet, but these are the components that we'll be using. So we want to auth.svelte component for authorization or authentication, an invite.svelte component for inviting a friend, login.svelte for logging in, register.svelte for registering. And then we're going to have a user and a mode that we're going to track in this component just for our purposes in basically moving through different states that it can be in. We're going to keep everything within app.svelte instead of splitting things out, just so that we're reusing things essentially. And so we'll use different states to control the appearance of it and what functions are available. And we'll create some skeletal functions here: invite, login, register, and auth, matching the names of the components that we're importing. It looks like we have a issue with npm install. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, but I'm going to go ahead. It looks like Amanda's on it. So, okay. So the HTML that we want to put in app.svelte is going to be a series of buttons to enable us to go through these different workflows. So if somebody's already logged in, we'll offer them a button to invite their friends. If they're not logged in, then we will allow them to either log in, register, or authenticate a PIN that they've received. And these are just going to be nav elements with buttons in them. So this is, if you've never worked with Svelte before, this is a little indication of about how complex this is going to get. So we're going to use the class hidden, which is just display none in the CSS to hide things that we don't want to show. And so the class will be hidden is what this syntax is saying if this expression evaluates to true. And so the expression is what's in the curly brackets here. So if not user logged in, then the class will be hidden. I'm getting myself turned around with too many negatives here. And for the welcome one, the class will be hidden if the user is logged in. So then within the navigations, you can see that the buttons have click handlers, and that's just on click. So if you've worked with almost any client-side JavaScript, you probably had an instinct that was an event handler when you first saw it. That is what it is. So on a click of this button, we are going to execute this logic within the curly braces here. And so that is just a function taking the event as a parameter. And all that function is going to do is change the mode of app.svelte. And that's purely used for setting the state. And then below those two, we're going to create a main element. And this is where we're just going to get into a bunch of if-else logic to control the visual state. And this depends on the mode that we set in the navigation above. So now we're going to use that mode to say, what mode are we in? And then show a component based on what mode we're in. So pretty straightforward. If register, then register. Like, so on and so forth. We push a register button, the mode gets set to register, and then you see the registration. So this is just a simple way of exposing all these things to us in one place so that we can reuse things. The interesting part here is the Svelte components and the syntax of the Svelte components. So you can see that the components are HTML tags, and the name of the tag is what we imported in the scripts here. So the names come from what we assigned when we imported these components. Now they become HTML tags that we can use here. And then these all have their own internal settings. So everything you see within these tags is set within the component itself. So register, for instance, has an event that it's going to dispatch called registered. And when that happens, we're going to call the register function in in app.svelte. Auth has a username property that it exposes, and we are going to set a default username property on auth when we instantiate it from user.name within app.svelte. And then it also is going to bubble up an event called auth, and we're going to forward that. And that's mostly what these are all doing. They all have their own event that they're going to dispatch, and that's going to correspond to an event here in app.svelte. Hamad, I didn't have any plans to share the slides. The slides are not accurate code. They're condensed, a condensed version of the code. So in some places I've eliminated things just to make them fit on the screen. But all of this code has come from what's in the GitHub project. So you should be able to see all of it. But let me know if it's taking you a long time to find it so you can follow along, or if I'm going too fast at all, please. Okay, so we're now ready to pop into the first workflow. If we have all the overhead of server.js set up and app.svelte set up, we can begin to add the code to actually execute the invitation to register. Let's see, it seems like we're still having some problems getting the database package installed though, so I don't want to move too fast. I will say though that if you just wanna try things out, like you can skip having a data store. Oh no, because you still need it for the sessions. I was gonna say you don't need it, but we will need it for creating sessions, which is probably one of the most important parts of this that we won't spend a lot of time like manually controlling, but like that's the important effect that we want to see. So it will be useful to have a data store available. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and continue, assuming that everybody else has got all the packages installed and has been able to either copy, clone, or cut and paste or type the stuff that they needed for the two main files. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is the invitation to register, because we want to, of course, be able to register ourselves so that we have an account that we can actually go through and test things out with. So within app.svelte, first thing we're going to do is comment out that bit where it says let mode equal login and change it to let mode equal invite so that we can sneakily give ourselves an invite and be able to test things out. And this is, as backdoors go, this is probably the easiest to remember to change because we'll see it visually if we don't remember to put it back. So then we want to create an invite.svelte component. An invite.svelte is going to have a very simple form on it. All that form is really going to contain is one field. We want to collect a phone number. And then, of course, it will have a button to say that we are ready to send an invite code to that phone number. The cool Svelte things to look out for here are within the input, we see bind value. So we're not just setting a value, we're binding to the value. That means that we're going to observe it and it's going to update itself without us having to do anything. So this is great. We no longer have to go and collect a value from here. Phone is now a variable that we have and we can use, and that's that. It's done. So now this input corresponds to a variable within the JavaScript that's going to be above all of this HTML, and it's usable to us. And then when we click the button, we're going to run an invite function that is going to do the actual work of sending this to the server. So on the server, and let me back up here. So now, do we want to go through the code in detail for this, or is everyone comfortable just talking about it? Maybe we can talk through it first, and then we'll go through the code, all of the code once we've talked about what we're looking for. Okay, so on the server side, we want to let users send invites, of course, and so we're going to create an invite endpoint, which is going to take a post request, and we're going to get the body, or the phone from the body of that, and then we're going to use that for Vonage.Verify.Request. Vonage.Verifyrequest is the first step. There are two steps in this process. Vonage.Verifyrequest is the first one. And so this is the one that's going to generate the check, or the text to the user. It's going to send them a code that says, sorry, I'll tell you exactly what it says. It says Vonage code 4781 or whatever it is, valid for 5 minutes. And that's the text that they'll get. And so that is produced by setting this from number. That's who we're going to send the text to. Vonage is the brand that it's coming from. So if you wanted to identify yourself, your own app, you would change this to something else, to your own brand name. And then workflow ID is 6, which just basically means that we're not going to give them a follow-up phone call or anything. We're just going to send them an SMS. And then we want to do some error handling if there is an error. Otherwise, we want to move on to putting this into the sessions database now, because now we have this other type of session, which is a verify session or an authentication session that we're going to make active. And that basically just means that somebody is in the process of going through this. So we need to track that we have sent out this verify code to someone, and now we're waiting to get it back and confirm it. So we're going to add that to a database here with their phone number and the request ID from the result object that we got in this function. And then once we have that, we're going to send our response back and we're done. And so that's all that invite button is going to do. The rest is up to the person who receives the invitation. And so now the client has presumably, the end user has presumably received their text message, and they are ready to come back to our site. And so they will have to already be aware of who is inviting them. We don't have the option to include a link or like any other information. So It's all a little bit like cloak and dagger, which is good for security because some malicious actor couldn't just click on a URL and go and sign up for something that they shouldn't have access to. But the user will have to come back and manually enter the verification code, knowing where to enter it. So we will go to the register page at this point. And so if the user comes to our site at localhost 5000 and clicks on the register button, they will be taken to, they will reveal the register.svelte component. And that is going to allow them to set up all the information that we want to collect from them. Their phone number, which needs to match the phone number we texted, obviously. The username that they want to use, and a PIN, which is the PIN that they receive via SMS. And if they submit all those things, then they can go ahead and register. And then this is where we start doing some kind of interesting stuff. So we didn't talk about create event dispatcher, but this is important in our components if we want to be able to bubble up components or bubble up events to app.svelte. So we're going to import create event dispatcher and then create a dispatch constant, which is going to do the actual dispatching. And so if we come down here into our invite function, we see that we are, I think I should have changed these. I was obviously copying and pasting a lot. So I think the function on register may actually be called invite. I'll have to verify this with the code. I'm not going to go through it right now because this is not the important part, but we're doing a fetch. I believe it's calling /register, not /invite. And then once we receive some data back and once we parse the JSON and receive some data back, then we're going to dispatch an invited event with the phone number that we've used. And then this is the important part. The server is going to verify that code and register the user. And indeed, the endpoint is called register. So we're going to first check that the username is valid using some regular expressions, which is always fun. And as long as it's, if it's not valid, then we're going to send them back a message saying you need to not be so fancy because we're not set up for that. And then we want to select the session that corresponds to the phone number they submitted. And so we're now going to go and do the checking of that request ID that we saved before into the sessions data store using this phone number as a key. And then once we get something back, we're going to handle it in the next slide. So this is what is going on inside of that once we return from getting that information from the database. We're then going to call Vonage Verify check, and that means, okay, I've got a session ID that or a request ID that I already created, and I've got a PIN number now from a user. I need to check that these two match against each other. And we never see any of the inner workings of the Verify API, so we don't have to worry about protecting the privacy of the phone numbers, the PINs. We don't have to worry about somebody compromising the way that the PINs are generated. We don't have to worry about any of that. This is all going to happen on Vonage servers and in a secure way where we're just calling an API and saying, I got in these innocuous pieces of information that a bad actor can't do anything with. You please check them and give me a response. And so if we get back a status of 0, meaning that they are a match, then we can go ahead and we will delete that session because we don't need it anymore. It's been checked and verified. And then we can go ahead and register the user by inserting into the user's database their phone number and their username that they provided to us. And so then we also are going to set a username on the session, the session within Express, so that we can keep track of who's currently logged in. And then we're good to go. They've registered and they've logged in. Okay. And the next step, what you might want to do to move this towards something that you would go ahead and put into your own application would probably be to let the invitee supply their own phone number. That way, For one thing, you know that they know where your website is and where they need to input the code that they're going to receive. And two, it keeps them from getting spammed by somebody sending them invites to something they don't want invites to, just to be malicious. So in a real world scenario, you would probably invite them via email to come and submit their own phone number via the invite form, and then they would be in control of doing that whole process, rather than the idea that just anybody is going to come and pop a phone number in there. But it's real handy for getting ourselves registered within our application so that we can then test things out. So 2FA is obviously something that we use to make logins more secure. And that would be one of the other primary places you would use it. So within login.svelte, we can create a login form. Again, feel free to just copy this from the existing code. And all that we're going to have here is a username, a password, and a login button, and then also a forgot password link. You'll notice that in this code, in the example code, I haven't even bothered connecting up the password to anything, because we're not going to store it. It's not actually part of any of the examples we're using. It's just what you would have in a real world situation. And to be frank, I don't want to deal with the overhead of dealing with passwords securely. So I've just skipped it. So this is just a label here that you could enter a password into, but because we're going to use 2FA, it's not an important part of our workflow here. But please don't be misled into thinking that that means you can't use a real password in real world code. So if we're setting up users 2FA, we're going to need to collect that factor from them, obviously. And so we do that in server.js, and we've already actually done this. So when we looked at when we looked at creating our databases, and when we looked at the registration function, we created a table for users, and that has a phone number and a username. The phone number in this case is our 2FA information. And then when we registered someone, we inserted a phone number and a username into that table. And then we're good. We've got our 2FA set up. We would probably have a lot more user information for a new registration in a real world application. But in terms of what we need to run 2FA, we need an identity for the user that we want to authenticate, and we need to know what that factor is, be it a phone number, an email address, a key for an authenticator, or a key for some other kind of key handshake mechanism that needs to get stored in our database somewhere. And then that's how we keep track of it. Then we're set up for 2FA. And after that, it's just a matter of verifying that that user is who they say they are using that factor. So we want to add the 2FA verification to a login process, is the bottom line here. So on the server, when we do a login, we're going to first select from our users database where the username is the username that's been supplied. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did for the registration, or the invite and registration. We're going to create a Verifyrequest, giving it that same user phone number coming from Vonage, same workflow ID. And then we're going to create a new session that matches that says, okay, I'm waiting for someone to finish logging in. So here's an active session with a phone number and a request ID, and I'm waiting for someone to finish that process. So the next steps in terms of the code that you've got in front of you would be first off to actually collect that password, to save it somewhere, send it to the server, and more crucially for what we're talking about here, probably be able to allow users to put their factors in order. So say my phone number is the first way I want you to check, but if my phone number isn't working, then I want to be able to use a backup code or something else like that. Allowing multiple phone numbers is also an option, particularly if somebody might have a local and an international phone number that they might be trying to log in from. And you want to, in addition to just adding 2FA to the login process, probably again require it for key administrative tasks, especially if you're setting long cookies in terms of how long their session is going to last, so that you know that they've logged in recently and nobody's had time to steal their phone in the meantime. Another workflow that this comes in handy for is access codes for forgotten password. I'm sure that a lot of us have probably already used this workflow in our real lives. Again, this is a familiar one, and it's super handy because if you are dealing mostly with passwords, like, you can still have the added security of 2FA to simplify the process when somebody forgets their password, which can be really difficult in some architectures. So just receiving an SMS to verify that you are who you say you are is a great way around that, to make it simple for users when they forget their password, which does happen, and does happen to people frequently, especially if they're using strong passwords. So you want to create a lost password interface, and this is the bottom of login.svelte. There's another hidden form here. It's hidden by the show forget Boolean, and all it's taking here is a username. So it's just going to take that username, and you can probably even guess what the server side of that is going to look like, because all it wants is that username. But we are going to first run through app.svelte. So if you notice, there's when somebody comes out of the login form, regardless of how they come out of it, in the Svelte application on the client side, they're taken to authentication mode, and so auth.svelte is the next thing that they'll see. They won't see just a message saying that they're logged in. So we now have this form here where they're going to enter the username again, and in this case it's read only because we've already collected it, and then they're going to provide the PIN that they've been sent, and then they're going to click to verify that. And the password reset process is something that it isn't covered in this code, because, as I mentioned, I didn't want to deal with the overhead of keeping passwords secure. But you would add a password reset pretty simply from an architecture perspective, assuming you already have passwords in place. So you want to set a flag when somebody clicks forgot password. Then you bubble that up to app.svelte to indicate that there's another step that you need to go through in terms of the state of the application. And then once the user's authenticated, you want to show that reset interface to allow them to complete a full forgot password workflow. So the next steps for this would be to, obviously, you want to track when people forget their passwords. You want to know if a password has become insecure. And then you want to probably, as a next step, reset or re-verify any additional information when the password is lost. So, like, you might want to check on, is the phone number still secure? Is the email still secure? There might be other factors, essentially, that you want to go in and verify when somebody has lost their password. At a minimum, you probably want to send out one of those emails saying, your password was changed, that I think we have all probably gotten at some point. Okay, and the final bit of this is passwordless access, which is absolutely my favorite. And I think for this one, if she's feeling up to it, I'm going to hand things over to Amanda to talk through this. And so this is going to build on what we've already been talking about, and we're just going to sort of use the same tools that we've been using with Verify to allow somebody to log in without ever needing a password, which is, if you couldn't tell, my preference. Let's see. Okay, 1 second. We've got some technical difficulties. Let's see if we can get Amanda. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions about the workflows that we just covered fairly rapidly, please let us know. We're happy to talk about those. Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to Amanda. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions about the workflows that we just covered fairly rapidly, please let us know. We're happy to talk about those. Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to Amanda.
Hello, everyone. I'm the person who's been chatting to you on the chat. And it's my pleasure to finish this up for, let me just close the other tab so you don't hear myself twice. So it's my pleasure to talk about Garann's favorite workflow, the fourth one. It's passwordless access. As it says, it's an access without a password. So to get started, we're going to register a passwordless account. We are going to need three fields here in the front end. The first one is the phone number. The second, Amanda, you might want to off the sound. Okay, just to check, can you hear me well? Let me check the chat. Okay, you can hear me well, sorry. So basically, we need these information here. Perfect, thank you for confirming, Clarice. We need the phone number, the username, and the PIN. And once you can see there is a button there, it says button on click, it's going to call register to verify code and register. You can find the code for that on server.js. So the three fields from register.svelte will be sent as the body of the request. When you click the button verify code and register on the form, this is the action that will be triggered to collect the data and send them to the server. So we make a post request to the register endpoint, and then you get the response, and then you verify that everything went well, that there were no errors. Thank you, Teresa and Aaron, for confirming you can hear me well. Okay, so this is server.js. And so this is a draft example of what we can do. It is not intended to be a production-ready code. If it was a reapplication, we would want to support other scenarios, such as to identify if the device and not only the user, of the application. The user, once logged in, should be able to visualize and manage what are their device sessions, just like we do on Gmail, with the devices logged in here, there, and there, on this tablet, on this phone, on this computer. Next steps, we would need to store information relative to the device being used in the database. We'd also need to store backup and diverse information to identify the user in case their phone number changes or is lost. So which are some of the ways that we could do it? Personal questions, additional factors. So with that, we complete the two-factor workflows.